All right, so welcome to our final webinar of the early learning series, and we're again thrilled to have you here today. We do have a hands-on portion for today, and if you joined us last week, you don't have to be logged in to participate today, but if you would like to log in and follow along with us, Nancy will drop a link to the CEDS website in just a minute into the chat so you can log in while we do our introduction this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. So today we're going to talk about determining the question for your ECIDS and how CEDS Connect Tool can help you. So, switch my slide here. I'm Jackie Hughes. I'm a business analyst with CEDS, and with me today I have Nancy Copa. She's a senior assistant director with CEDS. Now, bear with me one second. We're going to start off as everyone kind of rolls in with a poll to see if you were able to make it to our earlier webinars over the past week. This is the third in the series. So one second, I'm going to launch this poll. I'm just kind of going to read the room today and see who was able to make it. So hopefully that is popping up on your screen. So did you attend a CEDS early learning webinar? Did you attend webinar 1 or webinar 2? Give you a minute to answer. Maybe you are a CEDS expert and you didn't need to come to the first 2. All right. About 10 more seconds. Okay, so it looks like all 50% of you made it to the first webinar, which is great. And a few of you made it to both. So wonderful. We're glad to have you here today. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So, okay. So let's talk about our Connect tool today. We, if you came in a little bit late, I did mention that we are going to do a demonstration today of the Connect tool. And you can go ahead and log into CEDS. We dropped the link in the chat. If you want to log in and follow along with us, you don't have to do that today. If you attended both webinars or the one last Thursday, we did have you log in to do more of a hands-on demonstration. Okay, so let's talk about Connect. Today, our focus is going to be on our Connect tool and how to determine your use case. So you'll have that opportunity to collaborate with others in the early learning space that are on the webinar today as we work through a connection together. We will not finish that connection today, but we look forward to demonstrating that beginning process and how you think through your use case and how we start to build out that connection and how you can utilize this free tool in CEDS. So CEDS is a free online data use tool. It helps support an analysis plan for a use case, whether that's a research question, a high priority topic, or maybe it's like a hot topic within your state, or you want to answer a federal reporting requirement. Connect is a way that you can define that out and to make a plan and plan out your analysis and research. So when you're using the Connect tool, you take your question and then you start to determine, okay, what elements do I need or are necessary in order to answer this question? And the tool allows you to do that. And then you take those elements and then you have an analysis of how you need to put all those elements together to come up with an answer. So I have on my screen here that Connect supports 3 main areas: transparency, clarity, and collaboration. Connect can support your transparency. So when it comes to your research, it's a way for reliability and validity. So you know exactly the elements that were used and how you put those elements together to come up with your answer. Connect is used for clarity because everything is out there and it allows for a better understanding of what the data is. And then that last piece is collaboration. So anyone can use the Connect tool within your data system, or a researcher or any other organization can come out and replicate your work in order to validate it. I'll pause there to let you know we do have a chat going on. If you have questions, please let us know, and we will, you could also have the ability to come off mute in just a little bit too. So with Connect, it's kind of more of an art form. It takes about 25 to 40 hours for a connection. And you might go, well, it's just answering a question and determining the elements. And it seems pretty easy and straightforward at first, but to build out the analysis and determining like what the elements are, seems easy, but then you really have to work through as you break down your question to determine all the elements that you'll need and think through, you know, what is it that I need in order to capture this cohort that I'm focusing on in this question. So today, we're showing you an approach to building out a connection without reinventing the wheel. So following our demo today, if you or your organization are moving towards this, you want to build out a connection, reach out to us. We can help guide you through the process because again, we will not complete an entire connection, but we're going to get one started today. So we're going to work on building out a use case as a group. So we came up with a question for you all to think through today. And our question is, what percentage of children who received services starting from the time they were deemed eligible went on to pass the kindergarten readiness test? So some of you might go, oh, kindergarten readiness, that rings the bell. Eligible for services, your minds might already be spinning. Maybe you've answered a question like this before in your organization. So we're going to switch gears here in just a second. I'm going to pull up the chat though to make sure we don't have any questions before we move on. Okay, I think it looks like we're good. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Nancy Copa. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint here and go ahead and pull up CEDS. Bear with me 1 second. Am I clicking? Okay. Thanks, Nancy.
Sure. Okay, so now we get to do my favorite part, which is actually building a connection. I find these to be really fun, and I hope you do too. One thing I do want to mention on the rule of thumb about the 25 to 40 hours, I know that seems like a really long time. And so I do just want to make mention that that does include if you were starting from scratch and you were having to research, is there something already out there? Maybe another state has already done a similar report, and really identifying, okay, but how are you going to do your report? So that 25 to 40 hours kind of takes care of all of that, as well as putting the information into the Connect tool. So don't want to scare you by the 25 to 40 hours, but it really from start to finish on thinking through your question and getting ready to build out the data request you might need for your IT folks is what's entailed within that. So what we're going to start with is where you should start every time. It's what I would highly recommend from the start. And that is, well, first of all, you'll notice that on the CEDS, so the right-hand side of your screen, excuse me, that we have CEDS pulled up. And we're going to be spending the first part of our time really on that. And then on the left-hand side of the screen is where we're going to kind of walk through our question itself. But the first thing, and you can log in if you already had a login, but for the first, and for this first part, we are going to need to have Jackie log in. So she's doing that now. Because what we're going to do is first, we're going to go to the Connect tool itself and see if anyone has already created something similar to our question. So you can see now that Jackie has gone to Tools and then Connect, and now we're clicking on Find Existing Connection, because that's where you can see others that have been publicly shared. Now, in this particular case, we are looking at children with kindergarten readiness. And so Jackie is going to type into the search kindergarten, and it should populate with any other connections that exist. You can see that there's a number of them. The first ones showing up there, just so you can kind of read through, are showing you ones from EDFACS, that's what FS is, that's the file spec, and from the Civil Rights Data Collection. Now, those are certainly options. You can read through those. We're looking for something a little more tailored to research. And so we continue reading down, and you'll notice that the second to the last one there is what percentage of children who received any early childhood program or service, birth through age 5, enter kindergarten ready to learn. And that sounds very similar to our question, which was about being if you received services from the time you were eligible, did you enter kindergarten, pass the kindergarten readiness test? So we're going to go ahead and click on that particular one so that we can look through what a connection is like. And also it will be used kind of as our barometer on fixing for our particular question. Now, as we read through a connection, if you find that this works for you, and that you just need to tweak it a little bit, which is what we're going to do in this case, you'll actually be able to replicate the connection. So you would just go to options. That's fine, Jackie, you're doing great. Options, and then replicate CEDS connection. That's the fourth one there. In order to do that, you do need to be logged in. So it's one of those things that you will have to be sure that you're doing there. And Jackie's just giving it what our actual question was instead of what this particular connection is. So Jackie's provided that. She's putting the source. The source is going to generally be your organization, right? So I used to work for the Florida Department of Education. So when I was there, the source would have been the Florida Department of Education, and then the author would have been Nancy Copa, right? So that there's somebody that they can attribute it to, like somebody to talk to, and then the source is, what organization is it coming from? So that's just to give you a little bit of background on what you would fill in there. This is for our demonstration purposes, so Jackie's putting early learning webinar test. So you can go ahead and replicate, Jackie. And it's now created this connection, and you can hit OK. So what Jackie will do is go to Tools, Connect, and then because she is logged in, there's 3 columns there. There's Build, Use, and Learn. The build is where you really create your connections or you manage existing connections so you can modify them, things like that. The use is like what we just did, finding an existing one, using the connection that's out there. And then, of course, learn is where you can get tutorials and some additional information about connections. So we're going to go under the build column for manage connections. And that's because she just replicated and created this connection. So now you can see that it's actually there in my list. All right. So then what you do is you're going to click on the name of the connection, and it's going to take you to the administration screen. So what this shows you is it shows you the name of the connection. You can see the release status. We've not shared it. We just created it, so it is private until we release it. In this case, it says that it's not a test or a demo connection. We'll go back and fix that later because it is, and that just keeps it from being counted in, like when we have metrics on how many connections are out there. We don't want to count test ones. We want to count real connections. So that's what that's for. Obviously, it's not archived. It was just created. And then at the bottom, you'll see who has access to this particular connection. You can have more than one person on a connection, and to add them, and we're not going to go through it today, but to add them, you're going to go to the connection administration on the top left there, and then it will say manage user access. There's a couple of different roles. We do have a connection administrator. They're the complete owner of a connection. All right, so they can archive it. They can, they're the ones that can share it. They can modify it, all of that. They have all the power. Then we have a restricted user, and there's someone that can come in and modify the connection, and they can add other restricted users. And then we have what's called an authorized user, and that's someone that can see it while it's still private, but they have a read-only view, so they can't make changes to it. So those are the different roles there. If you go into the manage user access, there is a table there that explains the different roles, so don't worry about whether or not you remember exactly what I said just now, but just making you aware that that is possible for you to be able to do. So what we're going to do today, and what we're going to spend the bulk of this webinar doing, is actually working on this connection together. And so, Jackie, if you can hit modify the connection. Perfect. So this is what it looks like when it is in modification mode, right? So it looked all nice and pretty when we first saw the first one, because that's the final version looking one. This is where you go in and modify all the information. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk to you about the various parts of a connection, and then we're going to actually go through and talk about if these things belong, okay? Because that's really what the bulk of a connection is about. It's about having conversations with your colleagues and talking about how do we really want to answer this particular question. So first, I want to talk about the various parts of a connection. Of course, at the very top, you have the title or question. This should be something relatively short. There's also a few fields later. There's a description of a connection where you can provide much more information, but the question should be kind of short so that you can get at the point, people can understand without having to lay out everything that's going to happen in the connection. And then, of course, we already went over the author and the source. So the location, and Jackie's going to actually have to click that because that does not come up when you replicate, but this is going to be more than one state because we actually have a number of you represented today. So that's why we're choosing more than one state, but you can choose just your state. Or if it's something that you're doing for a national purpose, you can choose not applicable, or maybe you're from a vendor or something like that. All right, so we've discussed all the first part, and that's where now Jackie has selected that, yes, it is a test demo connection there. Excuse me. The next piece is the categorization. These are basically tags for people to be able to find a connection. You may recall when we were looking for the connection, Jackie typed in the keyword kindergarten. She could have gone to, there's a drop down on the left-hand side of that, and chosen from specific categories to be able to find it. So that's what these are. These are tags so that if you chose that category, this connection would show up in the results. You can go through and look at additional descriptors, categories, and then select as many as you want. And generally, when you're looking at them, they do also suggest additional ones that might contextually fit with what you're doing. So you have the ability to look at that. Okay, so that's all the like behind the scenes part on a connection, right? The little, the extra stuff. Now we're getting down to the actual meat of a connection. And those are the data elements. So a connection takes a question, and then you look at, okay, if I was going to calculate the answer for this question, what's all the data that I would need in my data set so that I could run the analyses? And then how do I put those elements together in order to do the calculation? That's what a connection is. So the first part here are the elements. Now, one thing that it does have the ability to do, and you can see it here, you can see there's a data label that says child age, And then towards the bottom of your screen, there's another data label that says child. And if she were to scroll on down, but you don't need to, Jackie, but if she were to scroll on down, there's some additional data labels as well. This is a way that you can group your elements. That way you can have all the ones pertaining like to child age can be together, all the ones pertaining to child, etc. And then it's easier for you and for the reader to understand these are the specific elements I need. Okay. So that's what you do. You create that data label. So you create that grouping there, give it a name, and then you choose CEDS elements. So Jackie, if you could just select choose CEDS elements so we can see it. Perfect. And this looks just like if you were on the first or the second webinar, or you've ever explored CEDS. This is our domain entity schema. So it shows up in Align, it shows up in Connect, it shows up if you go to the elements on CEDS. And so in this particular case, Jackie, if you just expand early learning, you can see there's additional categories there. And then just expand early learning child is fine. And then one more so we can get down to an element. Demographics, perfect. Yes. So then if she were to click on birth date, the actual words, then the details about the element appear. Every element in CEDS, as you already know, has a definition. Many of them have a format, and if it's applicable, they have an option set. So you're going to get all that information here. You can determine if this is the right element for your connection. And if it is, yes, go ahead and close the details. If it is, you just select that element, and then you'll hit save and close, and it will appear in your list. So now birth date appears in our list here. Okay. So that's how it works. If you are doing this and you do not find an element in CEDS that you need in order to build out the connection, you're going to be able to define your own. So you click define elements not in CEDS, and it provides you the fields to do that. The only one that's required is element name. So you could just give it a name and leave it at that. However, we do recommend that you go ahead and if you have access to a definition for that, or if you can provide a little information to help with the definition, we do ask that you do that because these elements are looked at to be added to CEDS in the future. So we just had our early learning our early learning work group in 2022. And they went through all the ones that had been added regarding early learning, and they reviewed them to determine which ones needed to be submitted as tickets to the open source community to expand CEDS. So the more information that you can give here helps further that. In addition, if you are adding elements here, we encourage you to go ahead and go to the open source community and add them there as well. That way they can get in the process and in the cycle much faster, can get added to CEDS, and then you can come back and update your connection to show the CEDS element. Okay. All right, so go ahead and hit cancel. And then Jackie, if you'll scroll down to the analysis recommendations. So the next step is that you create recommendations that go along with your elements, right? So our first one was around child age. So we want to talk about how do we use child age, how do we use those elements to actually get to the child's age. So that's kind of the concept that you go through, like how are you going to use those elements to get to the analysis to answer the question you have at the top. So that you have plenty of room to do that. It's similar to the data labels, the groupings above. You have the ability to create more than one section within the analysis recommendations. Very often when I'm creating them, I do them according to the data labels I did above. So if I had child age, I would have a section specific to child age under the analysis recommendations, because then the reader can easily see, okay, this goes with that set of elements, and they can go back and forth to make sure it's all working. That's not a requirement. This is just a suggestion after having built a number of these over the last 10 years. The other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is kind of thinking through the time frame aspect. That gets missed a lot in our connections. And so that's something that you want to think through, and we're going to actually discuss in just a few minutes. Okay, so the last couple of pieces there are related connections. So if you're building out this connection that we're going to work on today, and knowing that it was very similar to that other one, you may want to relate back to that other one, right? You may want to link over to it. And so to do that, you're going to click the purple bar there that says click to select one or more categories. And then you click within it, it would be educational levels, degrees, and organizations. Perfect. And then click the little magnifying glass in the purple bar. Okay. And then it's going to give you, there was an early learning one, I think. Early childhood, possibly, yeah. And then you should, I don't know if that's the right one or not. We're looking for the connection itself so we can relate it back. Yes, there it is. Perfect. And so you just click the checkbox. And then it should appear, I think. Okay, so I'll have to look into that because I thought once you click the checkbox, it would appear in the listing. So I'll come back to you on that one. So we'll just click remove filter there, Jackie, so we can move on. Okay, and then the final piece there is related. Well, there's two actually, but related references. That's if you already have a published report or information or something that you want to reference with regards to your particular connection. You can add, this is a way to have that hyperlinked there and to make it as a reference to, as a resource to your connection. And then finally, our author's comments / additional information. So anything you wanted to say that didn't get listed above, you can certainly put information there. It could be something like updated in 2023 or, whatever it might be that you want to say. And then you're going to click Save Changes. Now, one thing about Connect, the same is true in Align, that I want to make sure you're aware of is that we do have a 20-minute timer, and you can see it up in the top right there under your name. But we do have a 20-minute timer on any page when you're logged in, and that is to prevent the system from getting hung up because you started a connection and then walked away and went to lunch, and we're going to do it afterwards. So it's a way to free up our system. So it does have a 20-minute timer. It will pop up and let you know it's about to run out. Do you want to stay logged on? But what I would recommend is that as you're doing Connect, that you periodically click Save Changes. Save Changes will just shoot you back to the top of the screen. It lets you know that it's been saved. If you're all done for the day, you can click Save and Close. But if you're wanting to stay on it and continue working, I do recommend that you click Save Changes so that you don't lose the information that you've put in. Okay. Now, one of the things about Connect is that it does not have the capability to do like track changes or commenting, kind of like Word does. So very often when we are working with groups, we will actually build our connection in Word. And that's why Jackie has the Word document. And Jackie, if you can pull that up as well, because it's easier to have these conversations back and forth with the tracking and the commenting and things like that. If you have like a Word document, and then you can have conversations both online and asynchronously. And be able to work through the connection. So she has put the information from that connection over here. Again, this is from the other one, but we're going to go through it, and I'm actually going to drop a link to the Google Doc so you all can follow along if you like. Oh, Jackie did it. Man, you're good. So you all can follow along if you like. You can add in your own comments. It is set up so you can edit as well. But we're going to go through it, and Jackie is going to get you all off mute here in just a second. And we're going to, hopefully, the goal is for you all to actually speak up, because I don't know the answers on all of this. And that's where you all come in. You are experts and looking for your expertise on this. So that's where we're going to spend about the next 20 minutes on. So I do want to take a moment and just see if anyone has any questions as we're going through. If you can just drop them in the chat real quick while we get you off of mute.
Thanks, Nancy. And I think everyone should have the ability to come off mute now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. It looks like maybe Melissa does not. Which is one that got skipped. So we'll get that fixed. Okay, so now that you all can come off mute, does anyone have a question? You can raise your hand. Okay, I am getting better at this presentation thing every day because no one has a question. Usually Connect is where everybody has questions. Okay, all right, so as I mentioned before, and you are going to have to speak whether it's via chat or out loud. For this part, you are going to have to speak. That's kind of the hands-on portion of it. I know we're not actually going to be in the connection building it, but we are going to be discussing it. So that's the goal here. So what we are going to be doing is looking at the question, which you see at the top in blue there. What percentage of children who receive services starting from the time they were deemed eligible went on to pass the kindergarten readiness test? Okay, there's a lot going on in that question. I'm just going to stop us there and say that. Excuse me. First things first, we are looking at children, right? So we know we're looking at children because we're trying to find a percentage. We're looking at children who received services. So we know we've got to look at whether or not they received them, not just that they were offered, but they actually took them up on the offer. So they received the services. We're looking at from the time they were deemed eligible, and we need to discuss what that means. What does the time they were deemed eligible mean? So I'm going to come back to that piece. And then we're looking at whether or not they passed the kindergarten readiness test, right? So that's a lot right there. That's a lot. And that's why I know we're not going to get through this whole connection today, because we want to just first start out thinking through each of those pieces. So I have it pulled up as well on my end. So I'm actually going to just start with, we're going to be looking at children, and then we want received services, and we want from the time they were deemed eligible, and we want that they had to pass the kindergarten readiness test. Okay, so that's 4 things we're going to be talking about, right? So the first piece is children, and I know that seems like that's pretty easy, right? And you can even see down below that we have early learning child identified there. The question becomes on children, and so this would be my question to you all. Having seen this question, what are you expecting? Do we look at children from birth to 5? Do we look at them only in the 4-year-old, like the preschool? So it just says who received services. It doesn't say what kind of services they received. And So what are your thoughts on that? And this is where you have to come off mute or else type in the chat. Those are your choices. And I just want to say that I know several of you because you participate on my work group, so don't think I'm beyond calling on you. All right. We're going to try it. I'm going to call on you, Amy, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. Amy, what do you think in terms of children and receiving the services? What ages are we looking at here? And I can see someone's typing, so that's awesome. Amy, it looks like you're trying to speak. Jackie, are you sure she can speak?
Yeah, she should be able to. See her flashing.
I know, I can see she's trying.
Oh, she says I'm talking.
She says she's talking, but I can't hear her. Okay, we'll try someone else. Doris, what about you? Oh, I see you. Oh, Amy says birth to 8. Wow, that's past kindergarten. Okay. Perfect. Other thoughts on what ages we should be looking at? Birth to 5.
I'm gonna try and see if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yay! One of the things that I know we're being looked at with the EdVax groups was trying to align the age 5 of the kindergarten for early childhood. So that's one of the things that I would like to see resolved.
Okay. So, and that's a good point. We need to be looking at 5-year-olds looking backwards, right?
Right. We have this situation where we might have a 5-year-old who's not yet in kindergarten and they're still receiving early childhood services. So because they're 5, they're cut out of the federal reporting and they don't show up in our kindergarten count either. So we have this small group of kids that aren't being counted.
Okay, so then it might be, that might be something to think about in adding to this question, right? Is, you know, what percentage of children who receive services starting from the time they were deemed eligible go on to pass the kindergarten readiness test by age, right? And it would be those who passed it at 5, those who passed it at 6, 7, 8, because it has, you know, they're older as they start kindergarten. And I'm guessing, Amy, that goes back to why you said birth to 8.
Yeah, Nancy, I was gonna say, Amy said she worries about children who are older than 5 starting kindergarten. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We also have a comment that someone just focused, oh, you added that one, 3 and 4 only, yeah, pre-K.
Got that one. Good. Okay. And I apologize for those of you who are having issues. We will get the recording to you for sure. And hopefully you're able to follow along somewhat. We dropped the Google link in the chat, so hopefully you can follow along with it if you can't see this shared screen. Excuse me. Okay, so it sounds like you know, we need older children for the kindergarten side. See, this is why it takes 25 to 40 hours to get through these things, right? Because you got to sit down and think about this and make these decisions and that sort of thing. So we're thinking of garden side. I've got a couple for all the way back to birth, looking at services all the way back to birth. I've got one for looking at pre-K only, and that's 3 and 4-year-olds for the pre-K. So this is something that we would need to, as we go through a connection, we would need to come to some consensus on exactly what age of children we're talking about, right? That doesn't determine the elements that we're going to pull in this case, because we're going to be looking at birth date, and it's going to be birth date regardless of what day, of what year how old the child is. But it does impact the analysis recommendations. And when you go to write up about how to do these calculations, use these elements to do these calculations, okay? So continuing with this, I want to move on to received services. Now, generally, received services implies that not only were they offered the services, but they did not decline them or didn't show up or whatever the other 1,000 reasons are. They actually received the services. And fortunately, CEDS does have an element, and you can see it towards the bottom of your screen there under the community-based programs and services. There is an early childhood services received element there. The important thing, though, is that they need to have been deemed eligible, and they need to have received the services, because that's what's in our question, right? Once they were deemed eligible, they started receiving the services. So that tells me that we're going to need some dates to go along with this. And right now, as you can see in that list of elements, I'm not seeing any dates. So whether you're picking out your CEDS elements or you're just doing this in Word to get yourself started, you can just jot down dates, right? And go back and find, does CEDS have them? Do I need to create them? Whatever. So I'm just going to add some, services received dates. And I need eligibility dates, because I'm going to need that. I also am going to need a way to calculate what year are we talking about? What year did they enter kindergarten? Right? So if I'm looking at, they just passed the kindergarten readiness test because school's about to start. And so they're going into kindergarten in the 23-24 school year. How far back do I need to go? Doris, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. Are you going to also need to have end dates for early childhood? So say they were in early childhood for a year, but not consistently from the time they were eligible until kindergarten. How are you going to deal with those kids?
Well, yes, and that's a great question, right? Because what if they received the services, and I think this is what you're getting at, Doris, they received the services, but the services were no longer needed. And so they're out of that program. What do we do in that case? Is this something where we're only choosing children who started when they were first eligible and then remain in until they take that test? Or do they then, at some point, it's determined that, their eligibility has ended for whatever reason, they, the services helped and they no longer need them. Excuse me.
Or they could have been removed by the parent because the parent didn't want them to go anymore.
Right.
So they may still be eligible, but they're no longer participating.
In which case, according to our question, it seems like we would pull those kids out, right? They wouldn't be part of the answer. Because it's received services starting from the time they were deemed eligible and passed the kindergarten readiness test. But that's something we have to figure out, right? It only says that they received them starting at the time they were eligible. It doesn't say and kept receiving them until they took the test. So that's a great point, Doris. It's something that we need to have a conversation about and wrestle with and figure out what is it we're exactly trying to get at. Okay, and then the last piece of it, which I feel like that was getting at from the time they were deemed eligible, the last piece of it is passing the kindergarten readiness test, right? I think, I can't be 100%, but I think every state has a different one. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, please. But I think every one of them has a different one. CEDS does have assessment elements in there. But there's also, if I recall, and Jackie, if you will go to the CEDS side of your screen and actually click on elements, I think there's a kindergarten readiness one. So let me explain something to you about elements page. There are 3 ways to search for elements in CEDS. The first is the domain entity schema. That's that tree view, the folders that we were looking at before. It's a great way if you're looking at context. Fantastic. Highly encourage it if you're new to CEDS. That's where you start. I'm going to skip over to the last way because I'm actually going to come back and end up on the second one. But the last way is all the way on the right-hand side. That's a download. If Excel is your best friend and you live and breathe by Excel, that may be your way of looking at it. You can go there, you can actually download the entire standard in an Excel format, and you can do all the filtering things that you love to find elements. I do like that particular way sometimes, but the one that I probably spend the most time on is either the domain entity schema or that middle option there, which just says view, but it's more than a view. It's a great way to search for elements. So, excuse me, you can search, and you can go ahead and click it, Jackie, but you can search for them alphabetically. You can search for only new elements. This year, we have version 11. It came out in February. So if you want to see, if you've been using CEDS, you need to look at what was new or what was updated, you can search it that way. Or you can do a keyword search. And in this particular case, I want you to search for kindergarten and then start the word ready, R-E-A-D, so kindergarten read. Because I'm not sure if it's ready or readiness. Perfect. So you can see there assessment, early learning, developmental domain, and assessment type. Both have something with kindergarten read, something ready, readiness are within those elements. So in this particular case, on the first one here, it's the developmental domains, right? What they get tested on in the kindergarten readiness test. And you can see the words are actually showing up in the definition there. So that's one thing that I want to make sure that I'm grabbing for my elements regarding the kindergarten readiness test, because perhaps in addition to passing the kindergarten readiness test, maybe I want to break it down further and see how they did on each domain, right? What happened within each domain there. The other one, assessment type, if you can open it. And then kindergarten readiness is actually towards the bottom of your screen there. Kindergarten readiness is actually one of the options. So it's a type of assessment, right? And so that means that you would have in your system a field indicating that this particular test is a kindergarten readiness test. And that's perfect for what we need because we're trying to find, did they pass it? And so we're able to say, it doesn't matter what the name of it is, right? Every state calls it something different, but we're allowed to say, okay, these are all kindergarten readiness tests. And we want to look at the score the child received on the test. And so on the left-hand side there, on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll highlight it since Jackie's highlighting kindergarten readiness over there. Hold on, let me see. You can actually see the score value there. And that's because we want to know, did they pass or did they not, right? So that's what that's going to be about. All right. So now we have gone through, and we only have 10 minutes left, but we have gone through and we've just talked about the concepts themselves. We haven't even broken it down into every single element that we would need to go through. We've been trying to really nail down what are the concepts and how are we defining those concepts? What do we mean by it when we say children? What do we mean when we say received services, etc.? So that is step one of building out the connection. The next step, and I'm going to go through this very quickly because as we mentioned earlier, we're not going to finish this today, but I do want you to at least have what the steps are. The next step is you can do these next 2 steps in whichever order you want. It does not matter. One step is that you're taking each of those things and breaking it down into elements. What are all the elements you would need? So for children, you can see under early learning child, well, first of all, you know that we're trying to get a specific age. So you can see we have birth date there. We want to count children, so we have child identifier. You may or may not want the name. We threw those elements in there just in case, but very often we'll leave it at child identifier. And then the birth date. Of course, that reminds me, we need to add a school year, or we need to add a session begin and end date, something like that, so that we can calculate age, but also so we can start our time frame of what year for the kindergarten readiness test, what year for the services. They could have begun in, so if it's 23, 24, just for math's sake for the moment, bear with me, but if we did only up to 5-year-olds, 23, 24, we're talking, they started in 2018, right? So then we would be able to look at their services received anytime between 2018 and 2023. We would be able to look at the birth date anytime between 2018 and 2023. So those are the kinds of things that you do next. You really start thinking through, how do I get to the concepts I've nailed down, right? And the other step, and this is why I say they're interchangeable, because people do them in different orders depending on the way their minds work. The other step is that you're then taking that and saying, and how do I calculate it? And it may be something that you're doing simultaneously. You're saying, okay, I need a birth date, I need the year, because I'm going to subtract them to figure out have I got the right ages. I'm going to need a child identifier because I know I need to count students. So these are the kinds of processes that you're going through to develop your connection. Now, I'm going to leave you with this one last thing, and then I'm turning it back over to Jackie to close us out. My one last thing is, as you are going through this, the goal of this is so you and anyone else who might have the same question can sit down and know what data they need to pull out of their system and how they're going to put it together to get to the answer. So in this particular case, we had this question. We saw earlier that there was a very similar question somebody else had already had. And believe me, it is always easier to start with something that exists and make tweaks than to start from scratch. So I highly recommend that you go through Connect and search for any topics of interest to you, see if somebody's already created it. The CEDS team does do work groups very often, so if there's a particular one that you're interested in, let us know. We'll see if we can't get a work group going to help you build that out. And CEDS does have an integrated data store and a data warehouse, which we talked about in the first webinar. But those particular things, the integrated data store would have all this data if you loaded your data in there. And then you can take this connection to help expand the data warehouse, which a number of folks are doing on different use cases. Right now, they're working closely with Dwayne Brown, who's also on the call from the CEDS team. And right now, they're working on one around staff and employment. But who's to say that we couldn't do one around early learning, right? We just need what that use case is, and several states who are willing to work together to help expand the data warehouse so you can get that data out much faster. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jackie. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat or raise your hand. We have just a few minutes to take those questions, or we are available afterwards as well. So Jackie?
Thanks, Nancy. Lindsay, you asked about the recordings, and I am going to drop those in the chat. Our second recording is available, and so I'm going to send both of those, and we will, once this final one is available, we'll send an email out to everyone who's registered to make sure you have the recordings for webinars 1, 2, and 3. So Nancy already did the call for questions, and she put a plug in there about our work groups. If you, I'll drop the link to in the chat too for our communities page where you can find where our work groups are. We have our monthly OSC review meeting coming up on Monday. if you want to, oh, thanks, Nancy, beat me to it. If you want to just check it out and go, what is a monthly meeting? What is I want to learn more about the open source community. If you attended webinars 1 and 2, we talked about that open source community a lot. Come to the meeting. You don't have to talk. You don't have to have your camera on, but just sit in and listen and hear what's going on and the discussions that we're having. And we'd love to have you. So any other questions? Pause for a second. And if you want to schedule a demonstration with us, if you want to know more about the Align tool or Connect, we are here to help. Email us at ceds@ed.gov. Nancy dropped that in the chat as well, and we're happy to schedule time for you, or you're passing this information along to some of your colleagues. We can meet with them too. Happy to do that. So,
and if you want to nerd out with me and develop a connection, I'd love to chat. It's one of my favorite things to do, is build the connections. So if you're interested in that and aren't sure where to start or just need someone to brainstorm with, I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you all. I don't see any questions coming in right now, but if you need help setting up a CEDS account too, let us know. I'll say I have a few minutes. I can hang out. If anyone wants to ask questions here at the end, we appreciate you all coming and joining us, and we'll get all the recordings out to you all via email here within the next week. So thanks so much.